Well, let's.
Back up a little bit. Oh, you know what? Maybe they'll need to check the doodle screen.
Nah, it's all right. Is it? Are we live?
Yes.
Am I going to leave that on there or just have my face while I'm talking? All right. Good afternoon. We're here. We'll start off with the welcome everybody, and we'll start with a sound check from our technician booth. Okay, everything's going good. So if you're out there watching, you're not hearing sound, just check the settings on your computer. We're going to get rolling. Audrey and Kent Lewis here. We're going to talk about Virginia State Navy and Isle of Wight County Mariners during the American Revolution. The Virginia State Navy, as some folks also know it as a Virginia Navy boats. In doing the research, came across this quote. I thought it was kind of set everything, setting the scene for what happened during that time frame. And I learned something from reading this. I didn't know Virginia State Navy was the largest of all the state navies and has never really gotten the recognition for the role that it played. We kept the goods flowing in and out of the country using the tobacco for payment. So it kind of helped to fund the entire operation and those from that aspect. And that was a big part in turning the tides toward the American cause. This came from Robert Stewart's good book, which we've got listed some of these resources at the very end. So if I mention it, you don't have to scribble it down. We'll talk about it at the end. But let's set the stage. 1775, early spring. Lord Dunmore takes all the gunpowder out of the Williamsburg magazine, and the British warships are going up and down the river systems on the James and York, etc., basically running small raids on the locals who weren't too happy with that. The Virginia State Navy came about to wanted to provide security from depredations, as the Assembly put it, at one of the early Virginia conventions, provide early warning, help with the export of the important tobacco, food, and timber, and help protect gunpowder, arms, and rum was one of the big things they're bringing in. One of the big things that we learned about that didn't get mentioned much is Captain Barron and his ships out there intercepting critical intel on some of the plans that were coming up. Invasion of Charleston was one of them, and it showed that the navies were useful, that they could go out there and gather this intel while they're running blockades. Also mentioned in some of the research we found was John Goodrich and his family running gunpowder. They started off for the Patriots, but got intercepted by Lord Dunmore, and he kind of turned to the Loyalist cause and probably did more damage against the Patriot cause than a lot of the other British naval engagements combined. So in December of 1775, the 4th Virginia Convention had, with the original 2 regiments, put in 6 additional regiments. That's when Isle of Wight County's Josiah Parker and others came in and formed the 4th and parts of the 5th. And they also required the committee to provide armed vessels. So those vessels were empowered and required to provide from time to time so many armed vessels as they may judge necessary for protection of the rivers in the colony in the best manner and circumstances. So it kind of left it wide open on what we were going to do, what size the Navy would be, and how it would be comprised. During the next 6 months, 5 ships were purchased and several more ordered to be built. Some of the first captains, the Barron brothers James and Richard Taylor, Edward Travis, among others. The Navy Board was established in 1776. Ships were starting to be built or continuing to be built across the area in Virginia, with Chickahominy River having a big ship port and another big shipyard down in Gosport, probably the biggest, very important, changed hands several times through several different wars, with the American Revolution just being one of them. So they had to not just, get boats out there, you had to build them first, naval stores. We needed ordnance, provisions, needed to take the hemp and turn it into rope. So there's rope walks and other things that are going around, happening all around the area. Then later in the engagement, 1779, there's Navy Board was superseded by a Board of War. How do you get people to join the Virginia State Navy. Well, it was a little more lucrative to become a privateer. So the State Navy was kind of the third choice for a lot of folks out there, but it played an important role. So they put a pretty decent pay structure in place to try to entice people to serve with the Virginia boats. Some of the key naval actions early on with the Commodore Barron and some of the other ships patrolling the James and York and Rappahannock, they helped reduce the number of raids going on with the local plantations. So we could see that would help the Patriots stay patriotic to the American cause and protecting against the British raids that were going on. The capture of the Jenny early war was one of the Navy's early successes, showed that the Virginia State Navy and other state navies could have a cause and effect on the opposing force, kind of raised morale and helped everyone realize that this was an important part of the war. Towards the end of the war, though, 1780-81 timeframe, the British began the raids up the James River, and Benedict Arnold came in and pretty much took out every boat that the Virginia Navy had at that point, except for the Liberty, the Nicholson, and a few others, which we'll cover just a little bit later. There was a lot of support for Yorktown, I think pretty very vital support, bringing in troop supplies, artillery, and gunpowder, and a few other important items. Here's a map, a sketch of Osborne's. This presentation will be available. We'll do a little editing and make it, add it to the YouTube channel after you're done, so you'll be able to take a closer look at this map here. But this is up the James River with Benedict Arnold defeating, in a naval engagement without any boats on his side, defeated the Virginia State Navy by having the high ground and having the better ordnance to take out the ships that were in the river and didn't have very much room to maneuver. There's another thing I recently learned about, had no idea had happened in 1781. Virginia State Navy ran a raid on Bermuda to gather gunpowder. You may have heard of an earlier raid early in the contest, run down to Bermuda to gather gunpowder. I think they were mostly complicit in our activities over here, but boats headed down to Gunpowder Alley there in Bermuda and cleaned out every grain from the Bermuda magazine and then taken back to Virginia. And this happened, just right before the Yorktown victory. So, they're pretty much out of gunpowder before this happened. So having Virginia boats show up with some gunpowder, that's pretty important to the cause. We'll go through kind of a quick listing of some of the types of boats that were involved. We had Virginia boats from large to small, from brigs down to just small rowboats, essentially. So here's a few here, and this is a picture, a painting of Liberty with Captain Barron taking on HMS Oxford and capturing as a prize. One of the little things I noted on the back of the ship, it's flying the Continental Union flag or the Grand Union flag. I don't know if that's the artist knew for sure or if that's actually the flag that they flew at the time, but this would fly into 1776 with some of the American forces until the Betsy Ross flag came on scene. For brigs and brigantines, there were several out there. Mosquito was captured and the crew imprisoned, and the others were still doing research on. If you have family members that served on one, we'd like to hear about them. Schooners, there were several out there. Nicholson was one owned by our own Isle of Wight County Captain Sinclair, and also a couple of important Patriot was one, captained by Caesar Tarrant, an enslaved individual, and also Liberty was Captain Barron's boat. Liberty stands out, fought throughout the entire war, and was never captured. Schooner of about 60 tons with 10 guns, crew of 22, and fought in over 20 actions. Part of the fighting or evading fighting was done in a deep hole off the bottom of the Nansemond River when they scuttled the ship to avoid capture, and then raced her up to go fighting again. So 1781 in April, things aren't going too good for the Navy. They'd pretty much been wiped out. So they took some of the vessels they had, including Nicholson, down to the Nansemond River, found a deep hole, as they called it, and scuttled it, and then raised the boat later in September when the siege began at Yorktown and returned it to service. So just off the point there, down in the Nansemond area, just off the west side of Suffolk. If we looked at the naval chart, there's a hole down there, goes about 25 feet or so deep. And those of you know that know the local waters are pretty shallow in most places, but there's a couple of spots there in the Nansemond that drop down pretty good. Patriot, don't know that we have many good depictions, but here's a similar sized schooner called Sultana that's currently active, built in 1768. There's all types of drawings and information on this schooner. It's a topsail schooner that would have been used in all around the area. The multiple sail plan helps keep the sails down low where they can adjust and use whichever sails they need for the conditions. Some of the sloops we had were Rattlesnake, Gamecock, American Congress. We also used row galleys and gunboats. They could move around easily in the James River and the shoal water, and could have gunners, could put different types of cannon and swivel guns on them, and also primarily row propulsion. So here's a gunboat Philadelphia that is in the Smithsonian magazine. It's got some 9-pounders and some swivel guns, 53 feet long. So kind of small targets, but very maneuverable with the rows instead of trying to sail around in an engagement. And with these swivel guns and the type of ordnance used on those with the grape shot, essentially in close quarters combat, could have bring great effect to bear on the enemy. There's another little ship model of the USS Washington. These row galleys range from 40 to 80 feet and did have the multiple modes of propulsion. The Committee of Safety appointed Chris Calvert to build 2 row galleys down on the North Carolina to be engaged down in Albemarle Sound. And maybe those of you that don't live local may not be familiar with some of the geography of the rivers where the Blackwater, Nottoway, Marin, and Roanoke all flow into the Chowan and to the Albemarle Sound. So a lot of the food stuff was going out through this river complex, and a lot of the gunpowder was brought in the same way, which really upset Lord Dunmore. They were kind of bringing all this stuff in through the back door, and there's no way to for them to stop it. So the Caswell and Washington were built at South Key shipyard on the Blackwater River near the North Carolina line. And this became so interesting and important to Benedict Arnold and some of the other British that they ran raids down there to try to make sure it was destroyed. And I think we ended up burning it ourselves to keep it from falling into British hands. Here's a little information on it. May be hard to read for you, but talks about South Key, and it's kind of interesting to just imagine the Blackwater River with the large sailing ship sitting there loading and offloading cargo. One of our local boats we're real interested in was the little armed pilot boat named the Molly that sailed out there. They were small and fast and could pretty much evade pretty much anything. We'll get back to Molly in just a minute. We also had barges that were used in all the shoal water, and then there were a few prizes taken from the British. Some later sold to the French. Let's talk about some of the mariners involved. Both state navies, continental navies, it was hard to find people to serve, especially those that had experience and smart captains. And the one unusual thing is a lot of the mariners served both on land and on sea. So you'll see pension records that mention service both aboard ships and with regimental forces. You can't forget the role that the women played, taking care of the home front, making sure the farms were still running and all the kids were getting raised. And we had one local, most people are probably familiar with Elizabeth Bennett Young, who saved records during the conflict and hid them to keep the British from confiscating them or burning them. That's how we have records going back to the middle 17th century here in Isle of Wight. We think this, we're not sure about the painting. It looks very good, but potentially the records were being kept somewhere, not actually at the courthouse. And would have been probably 100 years worth of records to hide at that point. So don't know if just certain records were selected or they were offsite somewhere else to begin with. Some of our Isle of Wight County mariners, we've got a surgeon's mate, Dr. Applewhite, who served both afloat and ashore. He served on Liberty with Captain Barron as one of the two surgeons that were actually retained after the war. And he served ashore surgeon's mate at Valley Forge in 1779 to 1780, where he developed a treatment for frostbite that gets specifically mentioned in a pension record by one of the barons. And then went back aboard the Liberty after the war ended. Also had another surgeon's mate, Dr. Joseph Harrison, had the misfortune of being on the brigantine Liberty and died on a prison ship in Halifax. William Jennings was a pilot. Captain Latimer was friends with Captain Pasteur, and Captain Sinclair became first lieutenant on the pilot boat Molly, and later passed away on St. Eustatius. Solomon Matthews, Captain Pasteur, Captain Sinclair. What kind of got us into this particular presentation was we looked at Captain Sinclair back in December. Now we're looking at Captain Pasteur of Smithfield. His friend of John Sinclair married Honor Wilson, whose sister Ann Wilson was married to Captain Sinclair. So they kind of neighbors knew each other and families that all knew each other, along with Captain Latimer. Josiah Parker kind of plays a role in this. He had duties with the Safety Committee and with the 5th Regiment and Virginia Convention. So he had purchased this pilot boat Molly, we'll talk about more in a minute, but then ended up selling Molly to Pasteur, Bailey, and Watts. Pasteur had command of the galley Independence and then took command of the armed sloop Molly in 1775. And we believe about that same time frame his first son Charles was born. Many of these mariners, some stayed private, others went to the Virginia State Navy, and some actually did both. They kind of flowed back and forth depending on the needs of when and where and what the Navy needed. So Pasteur took a commission, actually sold the boat to the Virginia State Navy. He had a daughter born in 1780, Mary, and 1781 was cited as being a pilot during the French fleet battle of the Capes. And then the Virginia State Navy dissolved, had another son born, another daughter born, passed away in 1794, and has descendants from the Channel and Hodgson family that we're familiar with. Let's talk about the little sloop Molly. She's described as a stout armed vessel. 1773, as we say, was purchased by Parker and started with Master Charles Fulham, built in Baltimore, 25 tons, and had a crew of 4 men. Some of the characteristics of the sloops is this size, 30 to 40 feet long, 10 to 15 foot wide. It had an easy sail plan to be manipulated by just a few people, and a shallow draft to work the coastal waters. She was good to run dispatches and go gather gunpowder, as we'll find out a little bit more in a bit. So early 1776, so 250 years ago, this is kind of what started this whole trail. We saw entry where Captain Pasteur was sent from Virginia to southward and returned with 7,500 pounds of powder. So just imagine in this little boat running down the coast, evading the British, picking up some arms and probably some rum and returning back and bringing it in to help support the early on in the American cause here in the Virginias. 1776, the boat spotted again in St. Eustatius and then back in Virginia. 1777, sold to the Navy. He remained as captain with Edward Latimer as his first lieutenant. and then 1777 down St. Eustatius again, which was kind of a free port or a neutral port, if you will, that the Dutch owned that would sell cargo and anything to just about anybody. So then back again, Smithfield to Eustatius, taking out indigo and coming back with most likely war materials. Molly stayed pretty busy. She's South Carolina with indigo, back to Virginia with arms in 1778. Became a lookout boat with the bottom greased with tallow, and carried dispatches with Captain John Sinclair from Virginia to Rhode Island in 1781. And that had to be one of the essential activities during that war, is trying to figure out where the French were, where they were going. Information from Lafayette up to the French Navy to get them down to where they needed to be, because we know what happened in the October time frame of 1781. The other folks we mentioned, Captain Sinclair married Ann Wilson, served both in naval and privateer capacity. He was a talented blockade runner. We've got a separate presentation on him. We can do a live stream on that to get that recorded. And so they just used him as they needed, when they needed. So sometimes they wanted him acting as privateer. So he kind of had his own, he could make his own command decisions, didn't need to wait to find out what someone else needed him to do. Behind the crepe myrtles here is his house on Church Street. It's still there today, owned by the Hines family. Looks out over the Pagan Creek behind it, and you can kind of see why that was a great area for folks in Smithfield to keep their boats at, just right in their backyard. So 1781, Sinclair brought another shipload of powder from West Indies to Yorktown forces, using the little boat Molly. It's a great story. It'd be great in a movie, in case someone's wanting to write a movie about it. Set sail for Havana, through the middle of the British fleet at night. Got intercepted the French fleet with Comte de Gras, and brought him a message about what's going on in Virginia, saying, come on up. And on the return, they take the cargo off, put it on the smaller boats, and row through the middle of the British picket lines with muffled doors, and bring the powder to the American forces there that are forming up at Yorktown. And then later helps pilot the French fleet into an anchorage. There's several Isle of Wight County mariners that get mentioned in pension records as help bringing this 30 or so ships of the line of the French fleet in, and they'll anchor right there in the York River and bombard the British at Yorktown. There's more naval forces engaged at the Yorktown fighting really than the land forces. Here's one of Sinclair's boat, the little small blockade runner. This is not Nicholson. I do not believe it could be, but a little small topsail schooner that was very fast. Some of the things we're moving during this time frame: gunpowder, more gunpowder, weapons, indigo, and food flowing out of the farms along the Blackwater from inland. And then there are a lot of dispatches reading people talking about flour back and forth, find out if they have any flour. Can you see if they have flour over here? And I don't know if they were that interested in bread, or if they just, if it was code for gunpowder. Here's the route down on the lower left corner is Smithfield, downtown Smithfield, the town of Smithfield, where Church Street, where Captain Sinclair, Captain Pasteur would have had boats. And they sail out through the kind of the crooked creek there. It takes about a little over 3 miles to get from town of Smithfield out from the Pagan Creek into the James River, or the Hampton Roads complex, and then from James River down to St. Eustatius into the West Indies. Add on another it's probably another 1,500 miles or so. So going down to the south there, off the end of the Dominican Republic, is where they're taking some of these small boats. It's kind of an interesting time to think about these how talented these sailors were and how capable the boats were. And then they're also running up to Rhode Island to bring messages, dispatches to the French. There's a little zooming in on where St. Eustatius is, off of just east of Puerto Rico, off of St. Kitts and Nevis. It was a Dutch holdings at the time, and it was very popular for trade from mariners from all countries coming through and trading goods there. We'll talk about our honorary mariner that we have. Audrey came across his pension record, a drummer named Edward Hanna, and I think I can only read the pension statement verbatim. I don't think I'll try to condense this, but it said, "I do certify," and this is sworn to Josiah Parker. "I do certify that Edward Hanna was enlisted in, they believe, William Washington's company on April 1776 and continued in the 4th Regiment until he was captured at Charlestown, May 12, 1780. And he deposits that he was impressed by the British and remained on board the Sandwich armed ship, in which he was conveyed to St. Eustatia and Antigua, and that he deserted from said ship and got to Martinique. And there he entered on board the French ship of war, the Sovereign, and was in the Chesapeake on board the said ship at the taking of Lord Cornwallis, October 19, 1781, at York, and that he could not prevail on the French captain to let him return to his regiment, and he was compelled to return to the West Indies in the fleet, and that he was on board the said ship of war when the Comte de Grasse was taken and could not obtain permission to leave her, we were guessing, until the peace." And this was sworn to Josiah Parker in 1787. Here's a list of the references. You can't read, but it'll be on the video when we wrap up. And let's go back to this one slide real quick. We'd like to kind of give a lot of credit to Colonel Parker, because at the after the war was over, when he went on to do his other things, he took the time to write out and swear and subscribe all of these pension statements, which helped people get their pension and land bounties after the war, or the descendants of these folks. And, the paper, among, just to start with, the paper was not plentiful or cheap, and writing, and it was just took a lot of time to send this paperwork in, just kind of like it does today, to get it approved or sent back looking for more information. And he could have not done that, but he chose to do all that. So that's how we have a lot of these records today. So that's what we've got so far. We're hoping this opens up a conversation for people to bring in more information and let us know what what your family history says. And you can get a hold of us by through the Facebook page, or you can go to our newly refreshed webpage, iowchs.com, or you can, if you want, drop me an email at lewis.kent@gmail.com. So with that, we're going to get off of let's see, leave that up for a minute and see, was the chat working at all today? No, we didn't see anybody come into chat, so we don't know if that was working or not. This was kind of our first try at this, so hopefully we get some feedback from out there and see if the technical aspect of it worked, and then the content of it, if that was interesting. We're going to continue looking into some of these Revolutionary War folks from Isle of Wight County. So we're going to go ahead and sign off for now. We thank you for joining in with us today, and hope you have a great weekend. Take care.